I grew up in a household that taught you laugh or you cry. So instead of funerals, we do celebrations of life. Instead of natural birth, we do C-sections. And instead of lamenting that I was born in the wrong body and the discrimination that I faced because of it, I write funny speeches, which is a long way of saying hi. My name is Luke, and I am transgender. And before you say, oh my God, I never would have known, let me say, yeah, that's kind of the point. And it's also why I'm here today, to argue that access to sport is a human right, regardless of gender or sex or presentation. At least that's what the United Nations and the Olympic Charter says, anyway. It's also why the NCAA announced on Monday that they would not be holding game championships in any states that weren't completely free of discrimination, a response to the rising wave of bans across the nation aiming to keep the ballless out of playing ball. But to tell this story, we need to go back to a time before the shaving of peach fuzz and the updating of legal names, long before I was ever known as Luke. Because before I was a guy, I was an athlete, the kind of kid that was on 4 different sports teams at any given part of the year, from soccer to softball, taekwondo to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, basketball, and even swimming. As long as I had the right to play, there wasn't a thing in the world that could stop me. And coming out of the closet shouldn't have meant being kicked off the field. But literally overnight, good game, sport, and what a play became, do you have a penis? First of all, could you buy me dinner first? Second of all, no, not yet. I'm still working on that part. I mean, it's been almost a decade since I came out, and not even powerlifting, the Neanderthal of modern sports, will have me. And you'd think it's because of my freakish leg to torso ratio. You can't really see it on this Zoom call, but I really am built like a penguin, which means when I do a deadlift, I only have to get the bar like a foot off the ground, max. But no, I guess needing a little testosterone in order to live is somehow a bigger advantage than having the femur length of a 5-year-old. All jokes aside, sport wasn't the only thing I lost when I came out as trans. Never again did I get that oh so great satisfaction of post-practice Cool Ranch Doritos from the 7-Eleven up the street. And also the half of my family that disowns me, but to be clear, I miss the Doritos more. And so today, I am going to cover the 3 biggest misconceptions that are used to keep transgender people off the pitch and out of the public. We're going to talk about the biggest myth, we're going to talk about what the science says, and we're going to talk about the implications for everybody when you ban just one kind of person. And by the end of it, I hope you will see, as I do, that transgender people have always been here. And with the right rules, there's no reason to kick us out now. With that said, let's get into it. The first misconception is that trans female athletes are really just super ambitious guys who are willing to put on a bra and panties in order to topple middle-aged moms at their local powerlifting meet. Lucky for all of us, most guys aren't into wearing bras and panties, at least not in public. And if you don't believe me, just try this. Go find your favorite dude bro friend and ask him if you can paint his nails pink or put him in a skirt. You're going to see what I mean. Willful emasculation, not at the top of the average American male's to-do list. Probably because they're not women. And on a personal note, I promise you, I have not been sticking needles and alternating ass cheeks every week for the past 5 years just to be better at a sport. This is my life we're talking about and not the Tour de France. And now that we have cleared up the biggest myth, let's get down to the science. There's a lot of people in this country who believe that transgender athletes possess unique hormonal advantages over all other competitors. And to be fair, if being born a girl gave me superpowers, I probably shouldn't compete. Unfortunately, being born a girl only gave me problems. However, this argument is not one that's usually brought up against people who look like me. And so let's see what the biologists have to say about female athletes. According to Mayo Clinic, there are a number of medical conditions, such as hirsutism and polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS for short, that cause significantly elevated testosterone levels in chromosomal females. And to give you an idea of how significant that can be, I'm going to tell you about my friend Brandon. Now, Brandon is a transgender male like me. He was born a female and he is transitioned to a guy. But Brandon was diagnosed with PCOS, which means he beat everybody else to a beard before he even knew he was a he. And in case you're thinking that these conditions are 1 in a million, according to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, it's actually closer to 1 in 5. Compare that to the mere 1 in 167 women that are transgender, and it becomes pretty clear. If we're going to worry about hormonal advantage, worrying about trans people is kind of like banning microwaves to eliminate cancer. So 1950. And the difference is, trans people aren't microwaves. They're human beings with thoughts and feelings and values. And this brings me to the third and final misconception, which is that allowing transgender people to play in completely well-regulated sports still makes them somehow unfair. But there's a few reasons that is not the case. Namely, the NCAA and the IOC, the two most powerful rulemaking bodies in American sports. The International Olympic Committee worries about the best of the best, the elites, the Olympians. The National Collegiate Athletic Association worries about everybody else. And all of this is just a fancy way of saying the Illuminati of sports. And the Illuminati has spoken. They said, yeah, trans people can play, so long as they meet the guidelines, which include identifying as the gender you're going to play as, being on either hormones or hormone suppressors, and that once you switch teams, no pun intended, you can't go back. The biggest difference is that, understandably, at the Olympic level, the restrictions are a little more heavy-handed. For example, identifying as the gender you're going to compete as is actually a 4-year requirement, which basically means you need a bachelor's degree in womanhood before you even think about stepping on the track. Additionally, there is a random blood testing requirement. And they're not just looking for the testosterone levels of your average female competitor, they're looking for the testosterone levels of your average 8-year-old child. Which means we could substitute my 14-year-old kid sister's blood work for a trans female athlete's, and she'd be banned from the Olympics. So when you do see a transgender athlete kicking ass and taking names, chances are it's got more to do with penguin legs than it does with hormones. And with all these restrictions and regulations, it kind of makes you wonder, why is a flat-out ban necessary? Or at least it made the Associated Press ask that question when they surveyed more than 24 lawmakers endorsing bills to ban transgender girls from high school sports last month. Surprise! Almost none of them could name a single example of a transgender athlete causing a problem in their region or state. Maybe it's because they weren't. Because at the end of the day, being transgender doesn't actually make me better than anybody else. It just makes me different. You know what else makes people different in this society? Being anything other than white. Living with a disability, liking pineapple on pizza. But at some point in history, we decided that biological diversity is not a valid basis for exclusion and segregation. You know, being trans in this world can sometimes feel like being the last kid picked for a kickball team. I'm just asking that if you're gonna pick me last, do it because I suck at kicking balls, not because I don't have any. So, if you think, like I do, that we should be drafting laws based on scientific evidence rather than baseless prejudice, then get involved through the link in the chat. It'll take you to a website called Trans Athlete that organizes and updates a list of action items to help promote and protect people like me. But if you don't have the time or the bandwidth for that, consider this. The next time that you find a trans person being excluded or ostracized just because they're trans, consider engaging with that situation. Worst comes to worst, you end up buying somebody a much needed bag of 7-Eleven Cool Ranch Doritos at the end of a bad day. And I think I speak for all of us in saying there is no harm in that.